Good morning. It is 10:48 a.m. on Sunday, April 5th, 2020. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I've been up for a little bit. This is 5 more minutes, but because it's Sunday, it's also time for my cartoon rewatch series. Last week we finished up Cowboy Bebop, and this week we begin The Legend of Korra. We talked a little bit about at the end of last week about what show I was going to choose, but I tell you, as soon as the opening credits started for episode 1 of Legend of Korra, I just knew I had made the right choice. Of course, Avatar: The Last Airbender was the first cartoon series that I did these rewatches for, so you can. If you are seeing this for the first time and want to see my rewatch series of that, there's a playlist for it. I can, I'll link it, at the end and in the so-called doobly doo. The text below the video, if you don't know that term. Anyway, we're going to be talking today about episode 1 of The Legend of Korra. Welcome to Republic City. So, as I was saying, I knew it was right as soon as I saw the opening crawl, and I was just getting emotional right off the bat because it's clear immediately that the show just sets the tone so perfectly right away. We recall the classic opening to the Avatar: The Last Airbender episodes where we learn about the fire, and then the Fire Nation attacked, and we learn it's the story of this war, and we have to find the Avatar and help him save the world. And in this case, what we're doing is we're establishing, first of all, it's like, yep, Aang and his friends did it. They did a great job. They saved the world. But as things do, as things change, the time, Aang's time has come and gone, and as the seasons change, so must there be a new Avatar, and it sets this perfect scene of acknowledging and loving and respecting the previous story, but making it also clear that we're telling a new story, connected to the other one, but distinct. And I think that that's obviously important to establish right away because that's the whole premise of the series. And I love, too, how different they were willing to go in so many different axes in this series. Like, in some respects, it feels very of a piece. Like, you can feel the common heritage in both series in terms of a lot of the same people involved and so on, similar animation style and so on. But in many other ways, to make it a very distinct departure in terms of the story being told. Like, so, instead of a young boy, we have a slightly older girl. Instead of starting with him only knowing one element and running away from the whole Avatar destiny, we begin with Korra. We show Korra knowing 3 out of 4 elements already as a little kid and absolutely gung-ho about being the Avatar. We establish, and in an interesting note, which we'll talk more about in future episodes, is the one element that she doesn't know yet is, of course, air, which is, Aang's thing. So making that a distinct change, and then having the time period change so significantly, where we have all sorts of more modern inventions like radio and Satomobiles and blimps and all of these sorts of things, like big city stuff. Instead of season 1 of The Last Airbender being this big, long journey with kind of a chase of trying to stay ahead of the bad guys, we have it, no, we're going to really settle into this great big new location with lots of depth to it and try to work some of that out and settle in. And instead of Aang usually trying to travel in secret, we have a great big press conference where, she's announced to the wide public that she's the Avatar. There's so many places where it's distinct in the story being told, and I really love that. It's clear that they did that deliberately, right? And I listened to the audio commentary for the first episode, and they say it right out that they set out from the beginning of just saying, with love and respect for the previous story, and not implying that any of those were wrong decisions, but they want to tell a new, different story, and so they really start it from a very different place, and I think that's great. So let's talk a little bit more about this episode. We begin with a flashback to the discovery of Korra as the Avatar. We have, sorry, one moment. My little corgi here is struggling. We begin with members of the Order of the White Lotus traveling to the Southern Water Tribe to check out a rumor that maybe the new Avatar has been born there. And sure enough, they're skeptical, like, well, how do you know that your child is the Avatar? And it's pretty obvious because she already knows 3 elements. She just bursts through the wall. I'm the Avatar. You gotta deal with it. And it's so different from Aang. It's just charming and delightful that it's just like, oh, wow. And so it's so obvious that we're able to just directly cut all the way to her displaying some really impressive firebending skills, and we realize that she's been in training, and we learn from listening to the conversations there that she is now officially trained in water, earth, and fire, but not yet air. And we also at this point get our first view of one of the legacy characters. We see old lady Katara up there, Master Katara, who is, just like we would expect, that she's still got like a sense of humor to her, but she also takes things seriously when they need to be, and, she's the one that's kind of rooting for Korra and understanding of what she wants instead of just telling Korra what to do. And interesting trivia note, played by Eva Marie Saint, who's a classic Hollywood film actress who's in a bunch of Hitchcock films, for example. Anyway, so what we learn right away is that we have the masters telling Korra that you've always been skilled with the physical side of bending, but you struggle with the spiritual side. And that's, again, in opposition to Aang. And, all the more reasons like, oh, well, I'm supposed to learn airbending from Tenzin. He's Mr. Spiritual, right? And we learn that, Tenzin is Aang and Katara's son. And isn't that exciting? And it, of course, makes sense that he would have to be who the Avatar learns airbending from. How many airbending masters can there be, even 2 generations down? That's a slow build unless you just start having airbending just show up everywhere. But, based on the world building, it doesn't really make sense why that would happen. It seems largely genetic. So we have, this idea that we're going to meet, Aang's son and Katara's son, and isn't that exciting? And so sure enough, we bring in Tenzin. We meet him and his wife Pema and his kids Jinora, Iki, and Milo. And they're presented as, I love how they're all 3 pretty distinct as characters just right off the bat. We have Jinora, who's clearly the sort of more mature, thoughtful one. We have Iki, who's the excitable, oh my gosh, can we do this? Can we do that? Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. This is so exciting, blah, 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 blah. Chatterbox one. And then Milo, who's just like the little kid who's still half a wild animal. And So, and so we're introduced to Tenzin as just kind of this, parent who's just got finished a long car trip with these kids that are driving him crazy, and it's nice as he meets his, says hi to Katara, and we meet his wife Pema, who's pregnant and is making jokes about, wouldn't it be nice if at least one of their kids was not an airbender, because, she's not an airbender. And of course, like, how could she be an airbender? There's not really hardly any of them, right? So, she's non-bender, and she's just talking about, wouldn't it be nice to have a baby who's not blowing air in my face every 5 minutes? And there's lots of fun humor there. But of course, here's where we set up our first, point of tension in the episode, which is to say, he's not here to stay. Like, the whole thing was he was supposed to move down there to the Southern Water Tribe to stay and teach airbending to Korra, but he says he can't. He's one of the leaders of Republic City, but Republic City is very unstable right now. He can't afford to be away from it for so long. He has to delay her training more or less indefinitely. And Korra is very unhappy about that, but he's, can't be moved on the subject. And so this is where we have, Korra needing to make the decision on her own that she is going to make her way to Republic City on her own to track down and convince Tenzin to train her there. Even though initially they say, you're supposed to stay in this compound to keep you safe. Republic City's not safe. And there's an element of, I think there's some interesting nuance in that point, because on the one hand, she's a very skilled fighter, right? There's no question that she's exceptionally talented from a combat standpoint. So this idea of like, well, we've got to keep her safe. Safe from what? Well, we discover from what almost immediately as she arrives in the city, right? But we also get some nice moments as she's coming out, coming out of this compound and leaving, because first of all, we get a scene with Katara, who basically encourages her to go, and it's this nice parallel to the beginning of The Last Airbender, where Katara and Sokka have to leave their home to try to go rescue Aang from the Fire Nation. And that's, so there's a nice parallel there. It's also, we learn a little bit that, that she basically says that she's the only one left from our characters from the original show. All of her brother and all of her friends are gone. So we know Aang would have had to have died because Korra exists. But, we learn that, Sokka and Toph and so on must have also gone. And, Katara herself, she's up there, right? She's a kindly old grandma now. But encourages Korra to find her destiny and really understands. And so there's a nice moment there. This lovely sort of passing of the torch element, which is great to have in a show like this. And then we also have another point of divergence for Korra versus Aang. Aang had no family left, right? He had no one left. He was literally the last one of all of his people. Everyone he had ever known was gone. But Korra is not like that. She has parents, 2 living and loving parents that are, worried about her but understand what she has to do, and she, so she stops to tell them goodbye. And so, that's where, we send her off to Republic City. And Republic City establishes this new modern period. Now, I think if we felt like being curmudgeons about it, we could say 2 generations is not really enough time to show the level of advancement that we're seeing in the city here. But then again, we didn't really spend much time in big cities. I'm trying to think about it. The city, excuse me, the cities that we spent time in The Last Airbender, Ba Sing Se, obviously, was a pretty big city. But, even still, the idea that we would go to a big, sort of, you know, maybe 1920s era New York City style vibe from just two generations, I don't know. Hard to say. Then again, I suppose we have to look up what did New York City look like in 1880. I'm sure that's actually something that we could find, but before there's photographs, it's less obvious. Anyway, the point is, let's not worry about it. It is what it is. The city's there. There are automobiles, like cars, all over the place. Cable cars, um, blimps. It's like this modern city. And so here's where Korra is really excited. There's this big moment where she sees the giant statue of Aang, which is, of course, on the one hand, like inspiring, but also kind of intimidating. And but then she starts getting into trouble almost immediately. She has no money, so there's some very cute stuff with her polar bear dog Naga, wanting some of the food from the meat stand, but they have no money. Okay, well, so they go catch some fish in the park, and she learns, oh, there's homeless people here. She kind of thought that the city was where people were rich, right? But apparently not. And the homeless guy there is pretty charming. There's a fun little bit of humor where he describes the bush he lives in is like, took a long time to secure such a great bush, and then the little cartoon sparkles on it. But then, of course, she gets in trouble for fishing in the park. She's not allowed to do that. And again, it's one of those things where we're immediately starting to see these class distinctions, right? Because it's one of those things where, sure, it's okay for the city to have homeless people who have nowhere to go but to live in the park, but of course they're not allowed to catch fish to feed themselves in the park. Anyway, so initially that's one lesson Korra's learning, is that it's hard when you have no money and nowhere to go. That's hard. And even she still has somewhere that she's trying to get to, but it's not immediately obvious how, because Air Temple Island is an island. She needs a boat to get over there, but it doesn't know how to arrange that. So she's immediately then, trying to find somewhere else to go, and happens across a small Equalists rally. And the Equalists, especially at this early stage, it's played for laughs, because we're sort of meant to, at least initially here, be completely on Korra's side. That these guys are like, this guy seems kind of whiny. He's saying, benders are oppressing non-benders, and he's kind of trying to bait her into attacking him. And but at the same time, I think the more sophisticated viewers can recognize, well, gosh, yeah, probably in a society where you have some people with the equivalent of superpowers and lots of people who don't have those powers, that might actually be pretty hard to try to have that be an equal society, right? And so it's an interesting dynamic to introduce into a season like this. And so although Korra's instinctive reaction, this guy is strident, and he's basically saying, benders, they're the worst, they keep us down. And Korra's like, I don't do that, though. Not all benders, right? But at the same time, she's still kind of learning how out of her depth she is. So she's still trying to, move her way through, trying to get to Air Temple Island. And then this is where she is trying to ask how to get there, and discovers, this is a little gang of benders from the triad, the triple threat triad, that interestingly enough seems to be a racially diverse gang that includes waterbenders, waterbenders, firebenders, and earthbenders working in concert to oppress the non-benders, just exactly like the Equalist guy was saying. And so she's like, oh, well, gosh, these are clearly bullies. These are bad guys. I'm going to stop them. I'm the Avatar. It's my job. to protect people from bad guys like that. And so she fights them, but we see how much damage she causes because she's not being careful. She's so focused on stopping these actual bad guys that she actually causes more damage than they did. You know, the result of her stopping them is more destruction than they were going to cause. And so that's another element to introduce. And so the idea that, you know, the police show up and tell her, you know, like, oh gosh, well, you know, it's fine for you to say, yeah, these are bad guys, we're going to arrest them, but we're also arresting you because you caused a lot of damage. And, you know, she tries to run. Here's we get an action sequence. And the police being these metal benders that are coming in with, you know, these cables. It's all very cool and modern, and it just feels very different from anything in the previous series. And it's all very cool. But it's also a little bit of that element of, like, imagine being a non-bender. How would you see the police all being metal benders that all come in out of the sky like that from these blimps, right? I mean, you know, it's a little intense. They are very scary in their black uniforms. But you know, Korra fights them off for a while, but she's outnumbered and eventually is arrested. Here's where we meet another character. You know, so we meet Lin Beifong, who is Toft's daughter. But she's very serious. She does not care that her mother and the former Avatar were friends. She's basically telling Korra, you are not welcome here. You are not allowed to just come in and start just doling out vigilante justice. And it's, again, this element of, like, this is a city that has laws now, which means you can't actually just decide that a few people need to be beat up just because you think so. And cause a lot of damage in the meantime. So this is where, you know, Lin is another great character that I think in this point is, you know, even though she's clearly an antagonist for Korra at this stage, she, I think, is endearing as this sort of no-nonsense character, and especially once Tenzin shows up. And it's obvious there's this history between Tenzin and Lin. We don't have much of the details of it yet, but it's just immediately obvious from their chemistry together that, you know, that they not only have known each other for a long time, but maybe more. And, you know, Tenzin's basically saying, yeah, Korra's going to, you know, go back to the South Pole. You know, I'll take care of the damage. Let's just end it here. And then we get that amazing moment as Korra is leaving where, you know, Lin does the, you know, I'm watching you. And Korra does it back, like, sarcastically. And it's just this amazing little bit of animation where there's no dialogue, but it's so hilarious. And I think it establishes, again, that, like, Korra is a different character from Aang. She's not the same person, even if she is, in some ways, supposed to be the same person, right? You know, it's interesting. So we have, you know, at this point, you know, this is where Korra now has made it to Air Temple Island only to, well, okay, I guess we have the scene where they're picking up Naga first. And this is where she's trying to make the case to Tenzin, like, well, I saw a lot of the city today, and I can see why there's so many problems. I can understand why you can't step away right now. But if they need you, they need me too. And it's persuasive, right? You know, he's not won over yet. But I also really like the little moment we get where he's so serious and stoic, but we see the cracks in that. Like when she tries to say, Katara told me to go, and he says, don't bring my mother into this, and just immediately you can see, like, oh, dude's got issues here. there's some baggage going on in there, and that's great. But eventually what we discover is that you know, Tenzin is persuaded when he sees, you know, his kids saying goodbye to Korra, he decides, it's true. I was trying to prioritize the city over you because I felt like I was protecting my father's legacy. But Korra, you are his legacy too. So he decides to let her stay, and this is where we get this big press conference where there's all sorts of very reasonable questions she's announcing to the whole city and over the radio, like, I'm the Avatar, I'm staying, I'm hoping to help. But they're asking things like, are you going to be working with the police? Are you going to try to stop the non-bending revolution? Are you trying to send a message to the Triad? And she's like, whoa, I don't know any of that stuff yet. But she just talks about how she wants to kind of try to do her best. And there's a lot of people who are skeptical, including, as we close the episode, we had seen an image of this masked face before at the Equalist rally, but now we see, we meet Amon, who has some henchmen in very creepy uniforms that we're going to learn more about soon. But he's been listening to this broadcast, and he says, well, if the Avatar's here sooner than we expected, we'll have to accelerate our plans. Boom, boom, boom. And, so that is, Welcome to Republic City, our first episode, and I think it's so good. It just really strikes this amazing balance, I think, of honoring the previous season and using our emotional associations with it to tell a new, different story, right? Like, it understands and expects us to know some things about that and to have feelings about that. But also, I think it's an amazing decision to not have it just be one generation later, but two. So there are some ties still, but mostly it's separated. We're not having Korra. I mean, it makes sense that Korra wouldn't ever learn airbending directly from Aang because she's the reincarnation. She wouldn't be alive yet if Aang was still there. But so in some ways the story kind of demands that, but it also is just perfect in terms of allowing this to really be its own story while still feeling like part of a whole. And I love it so much. I'm so happy to be beginning this rewatch of it. And I hope that you will join me week to week as every Sunday I will watch another episode of The Legend of Korra and talk about it. But in the meantime, I'll talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.